All right, let's talk about something that's super common, but also, kind of confusing: urinary symptoms. Today, we're going to break down the science behind what's called a bladder obstruction and uncover a really surprising truth about what your symptoms are actually telling you, and more importantly, what they're not. So, have you ever wondered this? It's a question a lot of us ask ourselves at some point. Maybe you're making more trips to the bathroom, or things just don't seem to flow like they used to. These changes are incredibly common, and they often point to a single underlying cause. Let's dive in. Okay, so first things first, let's get right to the core of it. What exactly do we mean when we say bladder obstruction? It's called bladder outlet obstruction, or BOO for short. And honestly, it's pretty much what it sounds like. I want you to think of your urinary system like basic plumbing. Your bladder is the tank, right? And the urethra is the pipe leading out. Well, BOO is basically a kink or a blockage in that pipe. It makes it a whole lot harder for urine to get out. And that increased resistance, well, that's the root of all the trouble. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The symptoms that pop up because of this blockage aren't just random. They actually fall into two very distinct categories. And they give us clues about what's going on, depending on what the bladder is trying to do: either empty itself or hold on to urine. And here are the two categories side by side. On one hand, you've got voiding symptoms. These are all about having trouble emptying the bladder, and they're a direct result of that physical blockage we just talked about. But then, on the other hand, you have storage symptoms. And this is the fascinating part. These symptoms aren't caused by the blockage itself. Nope. They're caused by how the bladder reacts to having to work against that blockage day in and day out. So let's look a little closer at those voiding symptoms. You'll recognize these. They're all about the physical act of urinating just not working right. Hesitancy. That's that super frustrating delay before you can even get started. Straining is when you feel like you really have to push. A weak stream, or one that kind of stops and starts, some dribbling at the very end, and that nagging feeling that you're just not quite empty. Yep, all classic signs that something is physically blocking the exit. And then you have the storage symptoms. You can almost think of this as the bladder complaining about its terrible working conditions. Because it's constantly fighting against this blockage, the bladder muscle itself starts to change. It gets irritable, it gets less flexible. And what does that lead to? Well, having to go to the bathroom way more often, waking up at night to go, that sudden, I gotta go right now feeling of urgency, and sometimes even leaking before you can make it. So how does that happen? How does the bladder muscle actually change? This is the science behind all those storage symptoms, and it's pretty cool. It's really just a chain reaction. So step one, the blockage creates resistance. In response, the bladder muscle has to work way, way harder to push the urine out. Now, think about this. Just like lifting weights makes your biceps bigger, this constant extra work makes the bladder wall get thicker. It's a process called hypertrophy. But in this case, bigger is not better. A thick, stiff, overworked bladder loses its stretchiness, its elasticity. It just can't expand to hold as much urine anymore. And that is exactly why you feel the need to go so often and so urgently. Okay, so if the bladder can't empty all the way, that means urine gets left behind. This is called urinary retention, and it can become a pretty serious medical problem. But it can show up in two very different and sometimes really deceptive ways. On one side of the coin, you have acute urinary retention. This is sudden, it's painful, and trust me, it's impossible to ignore. It is a clear-cut medical emergency. But then you have chronic urinary retention. And this one is the really tricky one. It builds up so slowly, often with zero pain, as the bladder just gradually stretches out over months or even years, quietly holding on to more and more leftover urine. And this is exactly why it's so dangerous. Chronic retention is a silent problem. You could have a significant amount of urine staying in your bladder after you go and have no idea. Over time, this can cause things like overflow leakage, or even worse, it can create back pressure that can actually damage your kidneys. So, with all these different symptoms floating around, how does a doctor actually get a solid handle on what someone is going through? Well, there's a standardized tool for that, but it measures something very specific, and it comes with a really, really important catch. The tool is called the American Urological Association Symptom Index, or just the AUA score. It's a really simple 7-question survey where you rate your own symptoms, everything from how often you have a weak stream to how many times you get up at night. The whole point is to put a number on your personal experience. Your total score then gets sorted into one of three buckets: mild, moderate, or severe. It's just a way to standardize the conversation between you and your doctor and to track how things might change over time. Okay, so let's just pick a number. Let's say you fill out the questionnaire and your score comes back as a 22. What does that number actually mean?
According to the chart, a score of 22 puts you right in the severe symptoms category. This means your day-to-day life is being significantly affected. But, and I can't stress this enough, this is the most important takeaway here. This does not mean you have a severe obstruction.
And here it is. This is the crucial point. Study after study has shown there is a very, very poor connection between how bad your symptoms feel to you and how bad the physical blockage actually is. You could have totally severe, life-altering symptoms with only a tiny obstruction. And on the flip side, you could have a major blockage and only notice a few mild symptoms. The score is about your experience. It is not a diagnosis of the problem itself. And that right there perfectly illustrates the main idea for today. Your symptoms are incredibly important, don't get me wrong. They're the clues that tell you, hey, something's going on here. But they are just the first page of the story, not the final chapter. So let's just quickly recap the big points. Voiding symptoms, they point to a physical blockage. Storage symptoms, they point to how the bladder muscle is reacting to that blockage. And the big one, how severe your symptoms feel does not equal how severe the obstruction actually is. And that's precisely why an objective evaluation by a healthcare professional is absolutely essential to figure out what's truly going on.
Which really brings us to our final question. If all of your symptoms are just clues pointing you in a direction, what is the single most important step you can take to move from just having a suspicion to actually having an answer?